Over the hill, number 12. Thurman, and into Chamberlain. The league's leading scorer banks it in there. His shot goes up and in.
3 seconds to go in this first quarter of play. There was Russell blocking the shot by West.
Once upon a long time ago in the NBA, before the likes of LeBron, Steph Curry, Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, and even Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the basketball world was divided into two camps. This being the people who supported Bill Russell with his electrifying defense and uncanny impact on winning, or you were mesmerized by the demigod-like figure of Wilt Chamberlain, the man who couldn't be stopped on offense. And for a decade to a decade and a half, this debate was like the Jordan versus LeBron of that time. And while many younger people of today would completely brush off these two legends, saying things like they played against plumbers, or there were 8 teams back then, or if I hear the 100-point game wasn't real one more time I might lose it. Both Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell, to this day, still have some of the greatest careers ever, arguably even a GOAT case, and many of their records still stand today and will probably stand for many more years to come. During the next month or so, I'm going to be releasing several longer player versus player videos where I'm going to try to dive deeper into the numbers and context than anyone else will. So if you're interested in more of these videos, consider subscribing. And with that out of the way, I present to you Bill Russell versus Wilt Chamberlain. When looking at the Bill Russell versus Wilt Chamberlain comparison, besides stating the obvious fact of Bill Russell's 11 rings, the first real spot that most fans will go to base their opinions on these players is simply by looking at their box score stats. And this is exactly what we're going to do right now. Because these two NBA legends played back in the Stone Ages, we don't exactly have every number in the stat book to look at, so we're just going to have to go off what we had back then. When looking at the 6 main box score stats from back then, it's pretty clear who dominates. Wilt Chamberlain by far has the sexier stat line, averaging basically 30 points and 23 rebounds for his whole career. Wilt Chamberlain beats out Russell in every major box score stat except free throw percentage. Which, I mean, this is like comparing Giannis's free throw numbers to Shaq. It doesn't matter because they both can't shoot.
That is broken out here at Staples.
I mean, 56.1% is still atrocious. However, it's fair to mention that Bill Russell is just a hair behind Chamberlain in both rebounds and assists. What really sucks about Bill and Wilt playing in the 60s is that steals and blocks weren't a thing back then. According to some unofficial game logs I found, apparently Bill Russell averaged a whopping 8.1 blocks a game, and Wilt averaged 8.8 blocks a game. Not sure how accurate that really is, but no doubt they would have been stuffing that part of the stat sheet if it was around. Truth be told that back in the 60s, the NBA had little to no stats that actually tracked defense, which to no one's surprise was Bill Russell's specialty. And this paints Bill Russell as a worse player than he actually was. When looking at the advanced stats of these two legends, these stats more accurately paint us a picture of impact, efficiency, and production on the court. We see that it's still Wilt Chamberlain that largely dominates here. Chamberlain had by far the better PER, he had a way more efficient true shooting percentage. The guy had more win shares, offensive win shares, and win shares per 48. The only thing that Bill Russell beats Chamberlain in is defensive win shares. To really demonstrate the statistical dominance of Wilt Chamberlain over Bill Russell, Wilt Chamberlain in the 1962 season had the most unreal season in NBA history, literally putting up 2K numbers. In 1962, Wilt Chamberlain put up 50.4 points, nearly 26 rebounds and 2 assists. I'm guessing you guys have heard a thing or two about this mythical season. When you add up all 3 main box score stats, you get a score of 78.4, and we're going to call this number the season score. Now, I'm sure you guys are typically aware that Wilt Chamberlain's best seasons typically outshine Russell's best seasons statistically, but to the extent that Wilt Chamberlain dominates might just blow your mind. So I found the season score, or combined value of points, rebounds, and assists that Wilt and Bill had for each season of their career. When looking at both of their individual seasons compared, Wilt Chamberlain not only has the best season, the second best, the best 3, even the best 5, but Wilt Chamberlain has the 10 best seasons when comparing the two by individual seasons. Bill Russell's best season by this metric was in 1962 as well, where he averaged a solid 19 points, 23 boards, and 4.5 assists. This is the 11th best season between the two giants. When looking at this on a chart, the difference becomes even more glaring, making it without a doubt that Wilt Chamberlain statistically was the better player than Bill Russell. Now, if you're going to base your claim on the Wilt versus Bill debate based purely off these numbers, Wilt Chamberlain blows Russell out of the water. The only thing that Russell does better than Chamberlain, according to these numbers, is defense, but there's so much more context to consider here. We're far from done in this discussion. Looking at the awards and accolades that Wilt and Bill won throughout their career is huge when determining their greatness. The stats are nice to look at, but they only go so far. So let's take a look at both players' basketball resumes. First, looking at Bill Russell, the first thing on here that really doesn't even need a mention, Bill Russell's 11 rings really speak for themselves. Russell also has 5 MVPs, winning them in 1958, just his second season, then winning 3 in a row in 1961, 62, and 63, and winning 1 more in 1965. Bill Russell also has 12 All-Star appearances, 11 All-NBA appearances, and 5 seasons where he led the league in rebounding. Looking at Wilt Chamberlain's basketball resume, he has just 2 championships in 1967 with the 76ers and in 1972 with the Lakers. Wilt has 4 MVPs, winning 1 in his rookie year in 1960, then winning 3 in a row during the years of 1966, 67, and 68, when Bill Russell was starting to slow down. Chamberlain also had 13 All-Star appearances, 10 All-NBA appearances. He led the league in scoring 7 times and led the league in rebounding a whopping 11 times. A real pitfall of both Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell playing in the 1960s is that awards like All-Defensive Teams and Defensive Player of the Years weren't around, because it's almost inevitable that both players, especially Russell, would have racked up these awards. Again, going to Reddit, this guy from the Celtics subreddit wrote a whole detailed article that Bill Russell would have won about 9 Defensive Player of the Years and Wilt would have won about 2. Of course, take Reddit with a grain of salt, but these numbers seem relatively fair. So let's take a look at these awards compared. Bill Russell has more championships than Wilt at 11.2. Russell would by far have more Finals MVPs if the award existed during his time. Russell would also have more Defensive Player of the Years in all defensive teams. Wilt Chamberlain has a Rookie of the Year that Bill doesn't. Both legends each have 12 All-Star appearances. While Russell has more All-NBA teams, many of them were the second team, while most of Wilt's were the first team, and Wilt beats Bill out in scoring, rebounding, and assist champs. So with all that being said, I would award Bill Russell with the better basketball resume. While both legends are pretty much neck and neck for accolades like MVPs, All-Stars, and All-NBA appearances, at the end of the day, 11 championships overrides anything else that Wilt may have on Bill Russell. Now, looking at the stats and awards of Russell and Chamberlain is great, but basketball is a team game. When Russell and Chamberlain matched up against each other, who came out on top? Who won more games? Who had the better performances? If we completely threw Bill Russell's 11 rings and Wilt Chamberlain's 100-point game out of the window, who would really be better? When looking at the entire history of their matchups, Bill Russell has beaten Wilt Chamberlain more often, with a record of 57-37 against him. Bill Russell has beaten Wilt Chamberlain more in every single season where the two were in the league, except for 1967. And this is actually kind of funny because this perfectly aligns with whoever won the season series against each other in the regular season went on to win the NBA title. When looking at the individual stats, when Bill and Wilt played against each other, Wilt Chamberlain had the better stats. He was able to maintain his 30 points a game while averaging even more rebounds than his career averages. However, while playing against Russell, his efficiency goes down a little bit from 54, his career average, to 48%. Bill Russell's stats look honestly horrible, averaging 14 points and shooting 37% from the field. I mean, trying to stop Wilt Chamberlain for close to 48 minutes is going to take out a lot of energy from you and attention away from scoring the ball. Well, you may try to say that Wilt Chamberlain wasn't bothered by Russell at all and was still dominating him individually. It's worth mentioning that Bill and Wilt only played against each other from 1960 to 1969. They played especially during Wilt's prime. 7 of the 10 seasons they played against each other, Wilt Chamberlain was averaging over 33 points a game. The goal for the Celtics wasn't to outright stop Chamberlain, because this would be impossible. Their goal was to slow him down enough to reasonably control his offense, to bring him down to earth. How about the postseason though? Their first matchup was in Wilt Chamberlain's rookie year, back when there was only 4 teams in the playoffs. The Celtics played against the Philadelphia Warriors in pretty much the conference finals. The Celtics won this series 4-2. Chamberlain this series averaged 30 and 27, while Russell averaged 20 points and 27 rebounds. Their next encounter was in 1962, once again in the Eastern Division Finals. The Celtics once again took this series in 6 games. Chamberlain was once again doing everything in his power to carry the Warriors to victory, averaging 33 and 27 a game, but it wasn't enough. Encounter number 3 was the Celtics versus the San Francisco Warriors in 1964 in the Eastern Division Finals, and you guessed it, the Celtics won this series in 5 games. Wilt Chamberlain once again tried to haul the Warriors towards a W, but the Celtics wouldn't let that happen. Bill Russell had a very interesting stat line of 11 points and 25 boards, and for the next 4 straight seasons, the Celtics played against the 76ers in the Eastern Division Finals, where Boston won 3 of these 4 matchups in 65, 66, and 68. Wilt Chamberlain got his only playoff series win against Bill Russell in 1967. In the 1967 Eastern Division Finals, Wilt averaged 21 points and 32 rebounds to beat the Celtics in 5 and eventually get his first ring. Their last matchup was Bill Russell's last season in the league in 1969 in the NBA Finals. At this point, both Russell and Chamberlain were taking back seats in the offense, letting younger players like Jerry West and Elgin Baylor on the Lakers and John Havlicek on the Celtics lead the offense. Both Chamberlain and Russell were more playing a rebounding and defensive role. The Celtics won this series in 7 games, where Bill Russell had the goofiest looking stat line, averaging 9 points and 21 rebounds in the finals. Russell's record against Chamberlain in the playoffs is 7-1, only losing in 1967. When looking at the head-to-head playoff stats, Russell takes a slight step up from his regular season numbers, while Chamberlain takes a slight step down. But there's still more context that we're missing, especially about the teams both legends had. I think it's no secret that Bill Russell and the Celtics were by far the better team than Wilt Chamberlain's rosters throughout most of the 60s. But did the Celtics just have a super team around Bill Russell, or did Russell elevate the Celtics to a super team? To start us off here, let's look at the records of Bill and Wilt's teams throughout their career. When looking at this chart that shows win count on the y-axis and time on the x-axis, we can see that Bill Russell and Green easily had better teams throughout the late 50s all the way through the mid 60s. It wasn't until the late 60s where Chamberlain with the 76ers really started to put up better records than the Celtics. It wasn't until 1967 where the 76ers snapped the Celtics' 8-year streak of championships. And even when the 76ers in the late 60s were putting up better records than the Celtics, Boston was still the one winning the championships. But this chart fails to show us how much these two legends actually contributed to their teams. When looking at the win shares of each individual season, it becomes pretty clear that Wilt Chamberlain was contributing way more to his teams than Bill Russell. Chamberlain was consistently giving the Warriors and 76ers over 20 wins a season in his prime, while Russell was struggling to break the 15 win share mark most years. So when we look at this from a different angle, we take the amount of win shares and divide them by the amount of team wins to get a percentage of how much each player really contributed to their team, and this only makes the gap between Wilt and Bill even that more glaring. If this doesn't make it obvious enough, Wilt Chamberlain was putting the Warriors and 76ers on his back throughout most of the 60s, contributing as much as 67% of the Warriors' win count in 1963. Bill Russell never had a season where he broke 30% of the Celtics' contributions towards winning. Wilt Chamberlain did this in 9 separate seasons. It wasn't until Wilt got traded to the Lakers, where he had other stars around him like Jerry West and Elgin Baylor, where he could really take his foot off the gas. Another way to see how much each legend meant to their teams is to simply subtract win shares from the team's overall win count. Simply, how many wins did the team get when hypothetically the stars weren't around? Well, if we somehow needed more evidence that Wilt Chamberlain was carrying the out of his teams compared to Bill Russell, well, you have it right here. Hypothetically, the Celtics without Bill Russell would have still been a pretty decent team, still having win counts in the mid to upper 40s even without him around. whereas the teams with Chamberlain were completely dependent on him to win games. Without Wilt Chamberlain in the early years of his career, many of his Warrior and 76er teams that had win counts in the upper 40s would have struggled to break 30 wins without him. It's not until the late 60s and early 70s where Wilt's teams didn't rely on him as much. And all this just goes to show you how much the Warriors and 76ers of the early and mid 60s were so dependent on the production of Wilt Chamberlain to remain competitive, while the Celtics throughout pretty much all of Bill Russell's timeline in the league were always well-constructed rosters that were built for Russell to find success with. But there's still one more thing that needs to be addressed. March 17th, 1956, May 13th, 1957, April 10th, 1964, March 19th, 1955, March 8th, 1965, December 11th, 1965, April 18th, 1960, April 28th, 1965, May 5th, 1969. Why did I just name you guys a bunch of random dates from the 50s and 60s? Well, these dates aren't just random. These dates are every single time Bill Russell played a Game 7 or elimination game in his basketball career. Do you know how many of these 22 elimination games Bill Russell won? All 22 of them. Bill Russell is the definition of the clutch gene. It all started when Russell came into a completely unranked University of San Francisco in 1954 and completely shifted the basketball program at that school. Russell got his first taste of high-level playoff basketball in the 1955 NCAA tournament, where his team won 5 straight single-elimination games to win the whole tournament. And he did the exact same thing the next year, winning 4 straight single-elimination games to win the 1956 NCAA tournament. Right after that, in the same year, Russell and the 1956 Team USA won the gold medal in the Olympics. Bill Russell led Team USA in points, rebounds, and assists while beating Uruguay and the Soviet Union in the final tournament to win the gold medal. Russell led the main team in every single major stat category while putting up an average margin of victory of plus 53 points. There has never been a team in the Olympics to put up this high of a point margin ever. The next closest team to the 1956 squad was the 1992 Redeem team, who was pretty much known as the most stacked Olympics team of all time. They're just within 10 points of 1956. And looking throughout the ocean of Team USA squads, the next closest non-American team was the 1972 Soviet Union, with a margin of victory at plus 20.8, still 30 or more points outside of Team USA in 1956. And Bill Russell hasn't even started his NBA career at this point. Already with an 11-0 elimination game record, Russell in the NBA in the 10 Game 7s and 1 Game 5 in a best-of-3 series went 11-0, sealing off an undefeated record in elimination games. Now I just want you to pause for 1 second and imagine. What if there was a player who never lost a playoff series in his entire NBA career? A man who made it to the playoffs every single year and came away with the Larry O'Brien trophy every time. Well, what if I told you this could have been Bill Russell? Bill Russell in his 13-year career came away with the gold ball 11 times, but aside from unfortunate circumstances, Russell could have legit had 13 titles. The only 2 years he didn't win was in 1958 and 1967. In 1958, the Celtics were by far the best team in the NBA, winning 8 more games than the next closest team. The Celtics eventually met the St. Louis Hawks in the NBA Finals. However, Bill Russell was injured in games 4 through 6, and in games 1 through 3, he was literally playing with a sprained ankle that was supposed to end his season, literally playing in an ankle cast. The Hawks won the finals in 6 games. In 1967, the Celtics, fresh off of an 8-peat from 1959 to 1966, were looking to make that 9. In 1967, this was the first year that Bill Russell was a player coach, along with the first time any pro-American sport saw a black head coach. On top of dealing with the new situation in coaching a team, dealing with over-the-top racism, being a black coach in the 60s, and playing over 40 minutes a game in the regular season, and over 45 minutes a game in the Eastern Conference Finals. The guy was dealing with so much at once. Just imagine if Bill Russell never had that ankle injury in 1958, or if the Celtics had a real coach in 1967 and Russell could just focus on basketball. Imagine if Russell won a championship every single year he played. But what people really fail to mention about Bill Russell is how truly dependent the Celtics were on him, and how much the Celtics suffered without him. The Celtics, prior to Russell's arrival in 1957, had won just 2 playoff series in the previous 10 years of their history. The Celtics in the 13 seasons where Russell was playing had multiple 60-win seasons and only finished below 50 wins 3 times when Russell was there. In the 1968 and 69 season, which was an old Bill Russell's last year, the Celtics went 48-34 and won the NBA Finals. Do you know what happened the year after that? The Celtics record flopped from 48-34 to 34-48. Losing Russell meant a 14-win difference for Boston. Even during the Bill Russell days, when the man wasn't playing, the Celtics were still screwed. Besides the time in his rookie year where he missed due to the Olympics, Bill Russell only missed 28 games in his career. This is already an achievement on its own, but do you know what the Celtics record was without Russell? A pitiful 10-18. And to make matters even worse for the Celtics, when Russell had a stretch where he missed 3 or more games and the Celtics really had to adjust their game plan, Boston's record dropped to an embarrassing 1-12. But the true place where Russell made his mark on the game was defense. And it's actually crazy how impactful Bill was on defense for the Celtics. In the prior 3 seasons before Russell came to the Celtics, they placed 8th, and 6th place in the league in defensive rating. Reminder, there was only 8 teams in the league at this time. When Russell was playing though, the Celtics placed first, another first again, first, second, and first one more time. And when Bill Russell retired in 1969, the season after that in 1970, the Celtics defense jumped right back up to 8th place. Right here in green, we have Bill Russell's 13-year career along with the year before and after it for context. This is next level impact that no one in NBA history has been able to mimic. One of the real big issues of Wilt Chamberlain for me is that he was never able to impact a team like Bill Russell could. You would think with Wilt Chamberlain putting up huge scoring numbers early in his career, this would lead to the Warriors having overpowering offenses, but this simply isn't the case. The issue with Wilt Chamberlain's game is that his gigantic offensive performances didn't lead to anything. As a matter of fact, it was actually the opposite for Chamberlain. The less he shot, the more his team succeeded. And I'll demonstrate this for you guys. Right here, we have a chart that tracks the evolution of Wilt Chamberlain's game and the team results it yielded. On the x-axis, we have shot attempts, and on the y-axis, we have his team's offensive ratings. Right here, these 6 red dots represent Chamberlain's years with the Warriors. These were the years he was taking the most shot attempts, taking around 30 or more shot attempts a game. And as a result of this, his team's offense plummeted. The next evolution of Wilt Chamberlain's career was his 3 seasons with the 76ers from 1966 to 1968. This is the time that Wilt Chamberlain started to learn that less is more, because we can see in 1966, his numbers still resembled what he was doing with the Warriors. However, towards the 1967 and 1968 seasons, Wilt learned the importance of getting his teammates involved and not forcing shots. He learned to win, he actually had to take less shots, because Wilt went from taking 25 shot attempts in 1966 to taking 14 in 1967, which led the 76ers to a 68-win regular season and eventually a championship. Now, Wilt's last evolution of his game style was with the Lakers, where he really learned how to take his foot off the gas, playing with all-time greats like Jerry West, Elgin Baylor, and Gail Goodrich. Wilt Chamberlain played more of a Bill Russell role for the Lakers, mainly focusing on rebounding and defense, while letting his other teammates do most of the scoring. Is it any coincidence that the 2 seasons Wilt Chamberlain won a championship were the 2 of his least productive seasons individually and 2 of the highest team offensive ratings? While Bill Russell's sharpest weapon in his toolbox, his defense, completely transformed the Celtics into a one-of-one NBA dynasty, Wilt Chamberlain's sharpest weapon, his scoring, didn't lead to any team success in the playoffs. The Wilt Chamberlain versus Bill Russell debate represents one of the greatest phenomenons in basketball and sports in general. It's the difference between who's the better player and who's the greater player. These 2 words are not interchangeable. There's a big difference between the 2. Saying someone is the better player is typically referring to their talent and skill sets, while saying someone is the greater player is typically referring to their overall career and how it played out. For example, when comparing two players like Manu Ginobili and Tracy McGrady would be by far the better player, referring to his skill and talent, while Manu Ginobili is most likely the greater player, with 4 championships to his name. Dwight Howard is the better player, while Robert Parrish is the greater player. Allen Iverson is the better player, while Tony Parker is the greater player. You see the difference? Well, I believe it's the same thing for Bill and Wilt. Wilt Chamberlain is one of the most unstoppable and physically gifted basketball players ever. There was no one with as much talent and skill as Wilt Chamberlain back in that era. His numbers really speak for themselves. Wilt Chamberlain, in my eyes, is the better basketball player, the more talented and skilled player. Bill Russell is by far the greater basketball player, and it's not even close. The sheer will to win, the impact on the game that Bill brought in and night out, and the way that Russell dominated Chamberlain when they matched up, Russell trumps Chamberlain in. So if I was making a top 10 greatest players of all time list, which you should go check out by the way, I would put Bill Russell ahead of Chamberlain. Wilt is the better basketball player, while Bill Russell's the greater basketball player. Let's not get it twisted.